Now, from dealing with the aftermath of the Spanish flu in the early part of the century to dealing with the current pandemic, the South African Reserve Bank has had to manage various challenges. That since it was established 100 years ago, as the bank is celebrating its centenary, we are reflecting on how it has approached various events. Fundi Tshazibana, a deputy governor of the Reserve Bank, joining us now live here on the Midday View on eNCA to talk more about this. Good afternoon, Fundi, and welcome to the Midday View. Just from your perspective, just highlights for us of how the bank started and in its initial mandate 100 years ago. I mean, both you and I were not around.
Yes. Good afternoon, Dan. So when the bank started 100 years ago, the focus was on the printing of currency. That was a key mandate that the bank took over. Since then, the mandate of the bank has evolved. Today, the bank looks primarily after price stability, making sure that we preserve the purchasing power of yours and my rand at the end of the day. But another area that is new to the bank, introduced in 2017 more formally, is ensuring the stability of the financial system. And included in that is ensuring that the institutions that we transact with, that we bank with, who insure us, are safe and sound, alongside ensuring that other financial infrastructures, such as the exchanges, are also maintaining their financials in a prudent manner, alongside ensuring that that markets continue to function effectively.
Yeah, that's a very important role as a prudential authority. But let's just go back 100 years ago, simply because of what the challenge we're facing in the world today. Just after the Reserve Bank was set up 100 years ago, the world was traumatized by the Spanish flu, which we understand killed about 1 million people in South Africa. And from your information, from what you know, how did the bank then deal with that aftermath, given that it's been exposed to such a situation?
Yes, so the bank came in at the aftermath of the Spanish flu and the Great Depression. I think that at the time, the Reserve Bank was still very much linked to the Bank of England. We were still part of the Commonwealth of countries at the time. It's very little that is fully documented about that, Dan. But I would say that, if looking at the functions of a central bank, very important, even in the middle of a huge pandemic, for the central bank to fulfill whatever functions that it is designated for at the time. So the central bank still had to ensure that monies would be available. And as you know, the Great Depression hit our economy at that same time as well. And not long after the central bank was formed, there was the abolishment of the gold standard. So banknotes in the past used to be linked to the price of gold. So when the gold standard was abolished, I think it was a massive operation for the central bank to move into a new system where the value of cash and money would no longer be backed by gold, but it had to build a credibility because it is now the institution, which is the central bank, in this case the South African Reserve Bank, that stands behind these banknotes that each one of us are utilizing.
Yeah, 100 years ago was a long time ago, but let's come to the present. We are all now buckling under the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you say that the bank has managed to develop like a foolproof plan to maintain the financial and monetary systems? I mean, there must be some lessons now. Recently, the global financial crisis, about 2008 or so, that's one of the recent ones, but the pandemic is pretty new.
Yes, so there is never a foolproof plan, Dan, to the crisis, because every single crisis is different and unique. So in the 1980s, for example, South Africa experienced a banking crisis that required a different response from a bank supervision point of view. If some of you who are as old as I am, or slightly older, will remember we used to have a lot more banks. Now we have 4 large banks that are in the system. But part of the learning that we had to take on board as the central bank was, what are the types of things we have to look out for in a bank? How do we ensure that we consistently monitor to ensure that the banks that exist are safe and sound? And after the global financial crisis, we made some changes, and the most recent one was the changes that we made to the Financial Regulation Act. And that Financial Regulation Act actually gives some minimum standards in terms of the types of things that we supervise. We've put in place other standards in terms of the fit and proper requirements of a bank. Turning to this COVID crisis, the COVID crisis was very different to the financial crisis in that it started off as a health crisis with spillover effects. So as a central bank, our responses has been on the types of areas that would be affected. So we had a multi-pronged approach. Firstly, we responded to what was happening to inflation in the country. It provided us with an opportunity to reduce interest rates. So we reduced interest rates by 250 basis points. By 275 basis points since the onset of the crisis. So interest rates are at the lowest level in 54 years. We had to look at what was happening in financial markets and respond to that by providing capital to banks and intervening in the government bond market when there was a sell-off. The third thing we had to do was to ensure that households, customers, and businesses would continue to access credit from banks. And in this regard, we had to respond by reducing the regulatory requirements in order to allow banks to make the adjustments required to maintain their lending operations and to restructure some of the loans.
Okay, I think that's where we're going to have to leave it. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much. Deputy Governor Fundi Tshazibana from the South African Reserve Bank. She's a member as well of the Monetary Policy Committee. As you heard, she was talking about how much the interest rates have come down by 275 basis points since the advent of the coronavirus. Just